BYD just sent shockwaves through the global truck market, and almost nobody saw this coming. While legacy automakers were busy pushing $60,000 and $70,000 pickups as the new normal, BYD quietly pulled the pin on a move that could completely reset what a pickup truck is supposed to cost. This isn't a concept, it isn't a rumor, and it isn't a limited experiment. This is a real, production-ready pickup that undercuts competitors so aggressively it's already forcing emergency meetings inside rival boardrooms. For years, pickup trucks have drifted away from working people. Prices exploded, features became bloated, and simple utility was replaced with luxury branding. Farmers, contractors, small business owners, and first-time buyers were left with one choice: overpay or walk away. BYD saw this gap clearly, and instead of following the industry playbook, they flipped it upside down. Their strategy is brutally simple: build a tough, capable truck, strip out unnecessary excess, electrify it efficiently, and sell it at a price that makes every other pickup look wildly overpriced. What makes this even more dangerous for competitors is who BYD actually is. This isn't a startup gambling on one product. BYD is already one of the largest electric vehicle manufacturers on Earth, with massive control over batteries, motors, software, and supply chains. They don't depend on third-party suppliers the way most automakers do. They make their own batteries, their own power electronics, and much of their own hardware. That vertical integration allows BYD to slash costs in ways Ford, GM, and Toyota simply can't match without tearing apart their entire business model. The pickup itself is designed with purpose, not hype. The body is boxy and functional, built to maximize bed space and durability rather than chase flashy styling trends. The electric drivetrain delivers instant torque, which matters far more in real truck work than flashy horsepower numbers. Towing, hauling, city driving, and job site maneuvering all benefit from the instant power delivery that electric trucks do best. But BYD takes it a step further by optimizing efficiency instead of chasing record-breaking specs that inflate costs. Then there's the price, the number that has executives panicking. BYD's cheapest pickup comes in at a level that feels almost unreal compared to today's market. This isn't just cheaper than electric pickups, it's cheaper than many gas-powered trucks that offer less technology and worse fuel economics. When you factor in lower maintenance, no oil changes, and drastically reduced running costs, the long-term savings become impossible to ignore. For budget-conscious buyers, this isn't just an alternative, it's a threat to the entire idea of paying premium prices for basic transportation. What really terrifies legacy automakers is what happens next. Price wars in the truck segment have historically been avoided because trucks are the profit engine of the industry. SUVs and pickups bankroll everything else. If BYD forces prices down, margins collapse. And once margins collapse, layoffs follow, factories slow down, and long-standing business models start to crack. This isn't speculation, it's economic reality, and it's already happened in other segments where Chinese manufacturers entered aggressively. Dealers are another pressure point. Traditional truck sales rely on markups, financing add-ons, and service revenue. Electric pickups with fewer moving parts disrupt that entire ecosystem. BYD's direct-to-market strategies and global manufacturing scale make it even harder for dealerships to justify inflated pricing. Consumers are becoming smarter, comparing global options, and realizing that high prices aren't inevitable, they're engineered. What's also being underestimated is how fast this could spread. Once a cheap, reliable pickup proves itself in real-world use, word travels fast among working communities. Contractors talk, farmers talk, fleet managers talk, and fleets are where this becomes truly explosive. If a company can replace dozens or hundreds of trucks with lower upfront costs and lower operating expenses, the math becomes overwhelming. One major fleet adoption can ripple across the entire industry. BYD isn't just selling a truck, they're selling a message that affordability, utility, and modern technology don't have to be mutually exclusive. And that message hits at a moment when consumers are exhausted by rising prices, shrinking value, and endless excuses from automakers about why trucks have to be expensive. BYD is proving they don't. As competitors scramble to respond, the uncomfortable truth is that most of them can't react quickly enough. Their factories are optimized for internal combustion. Their supply chains are rigid. Their pricing structures are built on decades of high-margin assumptions. Slashing prices would mean admitting those assumptions no longer hold. And that's a hard pill for any legacy brand to swallow. And the most unsettling part of all this is that BYD is just getting started. Because this cheapest pickup isn't positioned as a premium flagship or a one-off disruptor, it's positioned as the foundation for something much bigger. Something that could expand into multiple trims, global markets, and even more aggressive pricing as production scales. And once that scaling begins, the pressure on the entire truck market doesn't ease, it multiplies. What makes this situation even more volatile is how perfectly BYD's timing lines up with growing frustration in the truck market. Buyers are already questioning why a basic work truck costs as much as a luxury sedan, and now they're being shown proof that those prices were never inevitable. BYD's entry acts like a spotlight, exposing just how inflated the segment has become, and once that perception shifts, it's almost impossible to reverse. Legacy automakers now face a brutal choice. Either they hold prices and risk bleeding market share to a foreign competitor, or they cut prices and sacrifice the very profits that keep their operations alive. Neither option is attractive, and both come with long-term consequences. This is why you're starting to hear carefully worded statements from executives about re-evaluating truck strategies and exploring affordability initiatives. Those aren't innovation announcements. Those are warning signs. The ripple effects won't stop at pricing. Engineering priorities will change. Suddenly, lightweight materials, simplified interiors, and efficient powertrains matter more than oversized touchscreens and luxury trim packages. BYD's pickup doesn't try to be a rolling living room. It tries to be a tool, and that's exactly what many buyers have been asking for all along. In chasing high margins, the industry may have forgotten its core audience, and BYD is stepping directly into that vacuum. There's also a geopolitical dimension that can't be ignored. Governments are watching closely as Chinese automakers push into traditionally protected segments. Tariffs, regulations, and trade barriers could slow expansion in certain regions, but they won't erase the underlying threat. Even if BYD doesn't sell this exact truck everywhere, the pressure it applies will force domestic brands to rethink pricing globally. Competition doesn't need permission to influence markets. It just needs visibility. Meanwhile, consumers are doing the math in real time. Fuel savings, maintenance savings, and lower upfront costs add up fast, especially in an era where interest rates punish expensive loans. A cheaper truck isn't just easier to buy, it's easier to finance, easier to justify, and easier to keep long term. That psychological shift matters more than spec sheets, and BYD understands that deeply. What's unfolding here feels less like a product launch and more like a stress test for the entire truck industry. The assumptions that held for decades are being challenged in a matter of months. If BYD's pickup proves reliable, durable, and scalable, it sets a precedent that can't be undone. Other manufacturers will be forced to follow, not because they want to, but because the market leaves them no choice. And as this pressure builds, behind closed doors, strategies are being rewritten, forecasts are being revised downward, and once untouchable segments are suddenly on the table for disruption, because when the cheapest pickup in the world comes from a company willing to play a long game, absorb short-term pain, and leverage massive scale. The real question isn't whether the truck market changes, it's how many players survive the transformation that's already underway. Another layer that makes this disruption so dangerous is how BYD approaches scale. They don't build for niche audiences or early adopters. They build for volume, and volume is what destroys pricing power across an entire industry. Once production ramps up, costs fall even further, and that creates room for price cuts that competitors simply cannot match without operating at a loss. This is the same playbook that reshaped the global EV market. and now it's being aimed directly at pickups. The truck market has long been insulated from this kind of pressure because of brand loyalty. Buyers grew up with certain badges, trusted certain names, and accepted high prices as part of the deal. But loyalty weakens quickly when economic reality sets in. When someone sees a capable, modern truck that costs tens of thousands less, emotional attachment starts to compete with financial survival. BYD doesn't need to win everyone over. It just needs to win enough buyers to break the illusion that alternatives don't exist. What's especially unsettling for competitors is how fast perceptions can shift once a single benchmark is broken. The moment a truly cheap pickup proves viable, every other truck is reevaluated against it. Suddenly, a $55,000 base model feels absurd. Suddenly, starting at prices become punchlines. This is how price anchors collapse, and once they do, restoring them becomes nearly impossible. Fleet operators are watching closely, and their interest could accelerate this disruption overnight. Fleets don't care about nostalgia, they care about spreadsheets. If BYD's pickup delivers acceptable durability and uptime at a dramatically lower cost, large orders could follow quickly. One fleet deal can mean thousands of trucks at once, and those numbers change production priorities, supply chains, and even political conversations around manufacturing and trade. There's also a quiet cultural shift happening underneath all of this. Younger buyers entering the workforce aren't as emotionally tied to traditional truck brands. They're more comfortable with new manufacturers, more skeptical of marketing, and more focused on value. BYD's pickup aligns perfectly with that mindset. It's positioned as practical transportation, not a status symbol, and that framing resonates in an era where conspicuous consumption feels increasingly out of touch. Behind the scenes, legacy automakers are constrained by decisions made years ago. Massive investments in engine plants, dealer networks, and legacy platforms limit how quickly they can pivot. BYD, on the other hand, was built in the electric era. Its factories, supply chains, and product strategies are optimized for this moment. That structural advantage compounds over time, making every delay by competitors more costly. What makes this moment feel pivotal is that it's happening during broader economic pressure. Rising living costs, tighter credit, and uncertain job markets make affordability non-negotiable for many buyers. In that environment, the cheapest pickup in the world isn't just attractive, it's disruptive by default. It forces uncomfortable conversations in households, businesses, and boardrooms alike. And as this tension continues to build, the truck market is moving closer to a tipping point where maintaining old pricing strategies becomes more dangerous than abandoning them. Because once consumers realize they've been priced out unnecessarily for years, trust erodes, brand narratives crack, and the competitive landscape begins to shift in ways that no amount of advertising can fully contain. That erosion of trust is the part no automaker wants to talk about publicly, but it's already happening. For years, buyers were told that rising truck prices were unavoidable because of safety regulations, technology, and inflation. BYD's pickup quietly challenges that entire narrative. It suggests that a large portion of those costs were choices, not necessities. And once that realization sinks in, it permanently changes how consumers evaluate value. What follows is usually a race to reposition. Marketing departments scramble to reframe expensive trucks as premium experiences rather than work tools. Feature lists get longer, trims multiply, and messaging shifts toward lifestyle branding. But BYD isn't competing in that lane. They're competing on function and affordability, and that's exactly what makes countering them so difficult. You can't outmarket a price that low without actually changing your cost structure. There's also the battery factor, which gives BYD a massive edge. Because they manufacture their own batteries at scale, they're insulated from price swings that plague other EV makers. Battery costs are the single largest component of an electric vehicle, and controlling that piece allows BYD to undercut competitors while still protecting margins. Legacy automakers buying batteries from third parties simply don't have that flexibility. As more details about this pickup circulate, expectations will rise rapidly. Buyers will start asking uncomfortable questions at dealerships. Why does this cost so much? Why does that feature justify thousands more? Why can a global company sell a truck cheaper than you can? sales staff won't have good answers because the real answers involve decades of structural inefficiency and profit dependence. Another pressure point is export potential. BYD doesn't need to dominate the US market immediately to cause damage. Success in emerging markets, developing regions, and price-sensitive economies builds volume and credibility. That scale then feeds back into lower costs globally. By the time competitors react, the advantage is already baked in. This is slow-motion disruption that suddenly feels very fast once it reaches critical mass. Even suppliers are watching nervously. If BYD's model spreads, it could force price renegotiations across the supply chain. Parts makers, logistics firms, and component suppliers may be pushed to lower margins, triggering consolidation and layoffs. The impact of a cheap pickup doesn't stop at the showroom. It reverberates through manufacturing ecosystems that depend on high-priced vehicles to stay afloat. And then there's the psychological breaking point for consumers. The moment buyers feel they've been overcharged for years, loyalty turns into resentment. That resentment fuels experimentation, and experimentation is how new brands gain footholds. BYD doesn't need decades of heritage if frustration opens the door for them. As this unfolds, the truck market is no longer just about horsepower, towing numbers, or brand identity. It becomes a referendum on affordability, fairness, and who the industry actually serves. And with every passing month, the pressure builds, expectations shift, and the old rules lose relevance, setting the stage for even deeper changes that are still waiting just ahead. Those deeper changes will likely surface first in how trucks are designed and positioned. Instead of being sold as all-in-one luxury machines, trucks may start splitting into clearer categories again: true work vehicles and true lifestyle vehicles. BYD's pickup aggressively reclaims the work-first identity, and that forces the rest of the market to explain why a basic tool has been treated like a luxury product for so long. Once that separation becomes obvious, it exposes how much unnecessary cost has been layered into modern trucks. Massive infotainment systems, complex trim hierarchies, and cosmetic upgrades suddenly look less like innovation and more like margin padding. BYD's approach strips the product back to what actually matters, and in doing so, it highlights just how far the industry drifted from its original purpose. This also puts labor and manufacturing efficiency under a microscope. BYD's factories are highly automated, vertically integrated, and optimized for EV platforms from the ground up. That efficiency translates directly into pricing power. Legacy automakers, burdened by older plants and complex labor agreements, can't easily replicate that without massive restructuring. And restructuring at that scale is slow, painful, and politically sensitive. At the consumer level, expectations begin to reset. When buyers know a cheap, capable pickup exists, patience for excuses evaporates. People delay purchases, wait for price drops, or actively seek alternatives. That hesitation alone can hurt sales volumes, which then pressures manufacturers to respond even if they don't want to. In markets like trucks, where volume stability is critical, even small slowdowns can have outsized effects. The used truck market also feels the shock. High new truck prices have kept used values artificially elevated, benefiting sellers but punishing buyers. A new, affordable pickup threatens that balance. If buyers can get a brand new truck for far less, used prices soften, trade-in values fall, and another profit pillar weakens. The ripple effect spreads quickly and quietly, on convincing people of a future promise. The value proposition is immediate: lower price, lower running costs, modern technology. There's no waiting for infrastructure breakthroughs or policy changes. It works now, and that immediacy accelerates adoption. As all of this converges, the truck market starts to feel unstable in a way it hasn't for decades. The assumptions that once felt permanent, high prices, guaranteed margins, predictable buyers, are suddenly fragile. And when an industry built on stability starts to wobble, the changes that follow are rarely small or reversible, especially when a competitor has already proven that a different model is not only possible, but profitable. That profitability is what turns this from an interesting story into a genuine industry threat. If BYD can sell the cheapest pickup on the market and still make money, it destroys the final defense legacy automakers rely on: the argument that low prices aren't sustainable. BYD's margins may be thinner per unit, but scale changes everything, and scale is where they excel. As volumes grow, BYD gains leverage in raw materials, logistics, and manufacturing inputs. Battery materials, steel, semiconductors, everything becomes cheaper when purchased at massive scale. That cost advantage compounds over time, allowing BYD to either hold prices steady while others raise them, or cut prices further and widen the gap. Either path is bad news for competitors. The conversation around trucks also begins to shift culturally. For decades, trucks were marketed as symbols of strength, independence, and status. BYD reframes that narrative toward practicality and intelligence. Buying a cheaper truck becomes a rational decision, not a compromise. That shift undermines years of branding that justified ever-increasing prices. This is where the pressure reaches the executive level. Boards start questioning why certain platforms cost so much. Investors demand explanations for shrinking margins and slowing sales. Shareholders don't care about tradition, they care about returns. If BYD's model proves more efficient, it becomes the benchmark investors use to judge everyone else. Regulators and policymakers may try to intervene, but regulation can't restore lost competitiveness. At best, it can slow adoption in certain markets. But even slowed disruption still reshapes expectations globally. Once a cheap pickup exists anywhere, it influences pricing psychology everywhere. No market operates in isolation anymore. The longer this plays out, the more uncomfortable the silence becomes from established brands. Announcements get vague, launch timelines stretch, promised affordable electric trucks quietly move upmarket. Meanwhile, BYD keeps executing, refining, and scaling without needing dramatic press events or bold claims. At the ground level, buyers notice the contrast. One side offers explanations and delays. The other offers a truck that works and costs less. In tough economic conditions, that difference matters more than heritage or marketing slogans. And as this gap widens, the truck market edges closer to a moment where denial is no longer an option. Because when consumers, fleets, and investors all start asking the same question, why does this cost so much more? The answers begin to unravel, setting off reactions that haven't fully surfaced yet, but are already gathering momentum just beyond the horizon. So this isn't just a story about one cheap pickup or one aggressive automaker. It's a warning sign for an entire industry that grew comfortable, slow, and expensive while assuming buyers would always pay the price. BYD's move exposes how fragile that assumption really is, and once it's exposed, there's no putting it back together. Whether BYD's pickup dominates globally or simply forces everyone else to change, the damage to the old pricing model is already done. The idea that trucks must be unaffordable has been shattered, and consumers won't forget that. Every new launch, every price hike, every excuse will now be measured against a single uncomfortable benchmark. The truck market is standing at a crossroads, and what happens next will determine which brands adapt and which ones fade under the weight of their own costs. One thing is certain: the era of unquestioned truck pricing is ending, and the companies that fail to recognize that shift may soon discover that the real crash wasn't caused by BYD's cheapest pickup, but by their own refusal to see what was coming.